By the end of this video, I want you guys to have built this chest of drawers with me. It is made with simple materials from Lowe's or Home Depot, and you may even have some of the materials laying around your house. Throughout this video, I am going to walk you step by step on how to build this, and I also do have plans available if you do want like a physical blueprint to follow. I know some people like that, so I like to make them available. They're at the link in the description for a very low cost. So throughout your first time watching it, get yourself a piece of paper and a pen, write down the materials you're going to need, and then come back, build it with me. Let's do it. Alrighty guys, jumping right into this. The lumber you're going to need is two 2x4x8s, two 1x6x8s, and a half sheet of 1/2 inch thick plywood. The basic tools I'm going to be using is a table saw with a crosscut sled, which I have a video on how I make a crosscut sled, as well as a pocket hole jig. Those are the main tools that will build this for you. As with most pieces of furniture I build, I start off with the top. So one of your 2x6s is going to be dedicated to the top, and I just cut 3 pieces at 24 inches, and then I lay out how I would like to glue them up. Now I do like to orient the grain direction. I just think it's good practice. And without a jointer, I just kind of like to play with a few variations, choose one I like, and then number them. And then I'll go through and just clean up the edges on the table saw. As I said, I've got full detailed plans available on this that I really spent a lot of time on. They're only like $5, so if you are going to build this, you can definitely do it without the plans. I'm going to give you the cut list and everything. But some things are just easier with physical plans in your hands. And then with the combination of those plans and this video, you'll be able to build this no problem. So that's just the first thing I like to do. Get the top glued up. That's going to be kind of what everything else gets formed from, is the final dimension of your top. Alrighty, so while that top is clamped up and drying, here is a screenshot of the first page of the plans. This is going to give you the cut lengths from the 2x4s, from the 1x6s, and from the plywood. So there's all your cut lengths. And that's what I'm doing in the portion of this video, is getting most of my cut lengths cut. Basically the main frame of this little dresser is made from the 2x4s, your top, and then your trim pieces and your drawer fronts are the 1x6s. All the drawers are made from the plywood, and then the side panels of the plywood as well. Now, as I've said in other videos, when I'm working with construction lumber from Lowe's or Home Depot, I like to make it a rustic piece. So the finished piece of this is going to kind of be a distressed farmhouse style with an antique base. And the reason I do a lot of my videos with this construction lumber is it's available to everyone. Like, you can run to your nearest Home Depot, Lowe's, or really any home center, and they're going to have these materials. And then a lot of times, a lot of people have them laying around their house as well. So that's just why I like doing it. I like selling plans to it. I really like teaching new woodworkers how to do this stuff. And with construction lumber like this, it's the easiest way for me to do that. Seeing as it's available to everyone, it's relatively cheap, and it's also perfect for pocket hole joinery that we'll be using here. So the next step, I'm going to be making the side sub-assemblies. This is going to consist of 2 side aprons, 2 legs, and 1 side panel. And actually we got to make 2, so you got to double those numbers. And these will be going together with pocket hole joinery. I will have exact pocket hole placement on the plans, but I'm not going to go over every single one in this video because that would just take too long. But it's pretty simple. Obviously you want pocket hole joinery where it's going to be hidden in the final product. Now the tabletop fasteners I'm going to be using to connect the top at the end of this video are Z-clips, as you can see here. And this requires a kerf mark going down your side pieces. This will all make sense at the end. But I made a mistake here. These are going to be your cross sections, so that's fine, but I forgot to put them in this piece before screwing. And I can't go all the way through because that'll go through the legs and it will be showing on the front and the back, which I don't want. So I kind of had to get a little creative here and do some table saw work, which I do not recommend doing this. I recommend cutting this first. So just remember, put your groove in that side apron piece before you do this, because I kind of had to just slide it over, and it's not the safest practice, but we made it work. And if you're not familiar with how these Z-clips work, they're my favorite kind of tabletop fastener. And you might be saying, why don't you just screw through right up into the tabletop? Well, with pine and stuff, that would probably be fine, but it's just not good practice. The top needs to be able to expand and contract freely, separate from the base. And as you progress in furniture making, you're just going to want to do this the right way. So I'll get into how I connect this at the end of the video if you're not familiar with it. But as for what's next, I'm going to be connecting the front and the back aprons. The top ones are obviously going to have the groove to connect to that tabletop. And there also are other tabletop fasteners as well, like the figure 8 ones I've used, and they work well too. And like I said, if you don't want to purchase tabletop fasteners with the size of this tabletop, this will more than likely be fine if you just countersink some screws and go right through those 2x cross pieces right into the top. Now, as you can see, I'm screwing the back aprons in 1/4 inch, so it's not flush from the back. This is in case I want to put a 1/4 inch plywood panel on at the end. It's not necessary, but I left it like that just in case you want to enclose in the back and give it a more better look. So with all that screwed together, basically here you've got yourself the main structural carcass slash box. So now it's time to kind of start working on the internals, which first I'm going to be putting 3 drawers in this. So I'm going to evenly space some drawer separators, I call them, in the front, and these will just be connected with pocket holes. Just make sure your drawer fronts, you want them to be the exact same size, so just make sure they're evenly spaced. With the drawer separators in the front, we need something for these drawers to ride on. So I am not using drawer slides here. You absolutely can, but I wanted to make this beginner friendly and basically use it with the wood that you have on hand. So we've got to make some drawer runners, which I'm putting in here. And now we got to get making the drawers, which this is what the rest of your 1/2 inch plywood is going to be used for. They're basically going to be drawer boxes made from plywood and pocket holes with an oversized drawer box bottom. And the drawer bottom is going to be made with 1/2 inch plywood as well, not 1/4 inch like I usually do. This is because the bottom panel is going to be used for the drawer slides or runners as well. It'll all make sense here in a minute when you see it come together. Is it the most professional way to build drawers? Absolutely not, but it makes it easy and lets you do it with simple materials. And as I said, I'm using 1/2 inch plywood for these, so you got to use the right pocket hole screws for this. I believe 1/2 inch plywood you have to use 1 inch screws. 3/4 inch material is 1 1/4 inch screws, and then your 1.5 inch material is 2.5 inch screws. Now when it comes to putting these together, basically the drawer front slash backs are going to have the pocket holes in them, and those are going to get screwed into the drawer sides, and that is what's going to form your box, and that's going to be centered on the drawer bottom so that there is a 1/2 inch on each side hanging out, and the front and the back will be flush with the bottom. Those 1/2 inch parts hanging out on each side, that's what's going to be your drawer runners. Basically, those are your drawer slides. That's what's replacing them. Once again, that'll make sense at the end when it all comes together. And what I do is pocket hole that down into the drawer bottom, and then I clamp the sides as there's no pocket holes in there because you want to keep that hidden. Now, one thing to worry about when you're not using drawer slides is there's nothing to stop it from tipping up when you pull the drawer out. So here I'm just using a scrap piece of that plywood with some tape wrapped around it. This will just make it a little thicker and give it a little more space. And I'm just putting a plywood stopper on top of that, so that when you pull the plywood drawer out, it doesn't tip up and tip out on you. This will stop it from doing that. Next up, we got to cut the base trim pieces. Now, I save this for the end. I don't cut this right away, because usually this is cut to fit. You don't know exactly what it's going to be. And usually, this is a lot easier to cut on like a compound miter saw. All I have when I'm traveling like this is my table saw. So I've got to just turn the blade and use a speed square to make sure it's exactly 45 degrees. And then I just use my miter gauge as a little sled to cut it. And it works just fine. It's just a compound miter saw would be a lot quicker for this. Before I connect them, I do want to give them a little detail. So my drawer fronts, I want to do kind of a little round over. And once again, if you don't have a router, this is not necessary at all. I definitely like to at least use a sander though to get the sharp edges off, as you can see what I'm doing here on the top. But by no means do you need a router to make this project. Just make sure you do knock down all the sharp edges, just so you're not going to get a sliver or anything like that. I'm using my little palm hand mouse sander that just takes normal sanding discs that any orbital sander will use. As far as connecting the bottom trim pieces, I am going to use glue as well as my 18 gauge brad nailer. If you don't have a brad nailer, you can honestly just use glue for this and it'll be more than sufficient. I just didn't want to wait for clamping. I'm trying to throw out just a couple different options if you don't have tools. In these videos, I always get ridiculed for how many tools I have, but it's not like I came out of the womb with these tools. I made do with what I had before I had them. And there's plenty of ways to do this stuff. There's way more than one way to skin a cat. You just gotta work with what you have and make it work. If there's a will, there's a way. Now, in my case, I bought some farmhouse feet on Amazon. They were like 15 bucks to add to this. And what I'm doing here is just marking out where they're gonna go. This is completely optional. You can leave that bottom trim as is, and that'll be just fine. I'm just adding the feet because my wife liked it, and it just adds to the farmhouse character or look. But it adds $15 to the cost as well. So you gotta pick and choose what you want. I will have these ones linked in the description from Amazon. They're pretty easy to install. Basically, you drill a hole for these threaded inserts, screw them in, and then you can screw the feet onto them. Now, before we get to finishing and painting this base, there's a little bit of prep work I like to do. These seams where the panels come together, I like to run a bead of caulk there. Basically anywhere two pieces of wood come together the long way. If it's not a super tight fit and there's a little gap there, painting that gap is like impossible. So it's good to fill that with caulk, because if it's not filled, it's just not a good look. You see this a lot with trim in houses. It's just good to caulk that before painting. Another thing I gotta do is cover those brad nail holes that I just mixed up a little bit of my homemade wood filler with wood glue and sawdust from my orbital sander. And while I'm waiting for that filler to dry, what I'm gonna do is stain the top. I'm gonna have a stained top. My base is gonna be painted because that is your typical farmhouse look. And when I'm staining the top, especially with pine, I like to use wood conditioner. Otherwise, it is super blotchy. So I put that conditioner on, let it dry, and the bottom I won't put the conditioner on here, but you can see this is where it's kind of super blotchy and not that good looking. There's dark spots, there's light spots, and then when I flip it over and put the stain on the top, you can see it goes on a lot more even and it'll just look better. It definitely does make a big difference. Whenever I'm using stain on pine, that wood conditioner is a must-have. Then once the brad nail holes are dry, I go back with my orbital sander and just sand off that wood filler. Spackle's a lot easier to use here as well. It just sands off a lot easier. I didn't have any, that's why I used my wood filler. Another thing I didn't have is really a good finish for the top. Don't judge me on all this stuff I don't have. I'm working out of my RV. I don't have a shop. But I'm using shellac for the top of this. This is not a good standalone finish for a tabletop. And I do put a furniture polish over this, but ideally like a polyurethane is going to be better. Now for the base, I am using this milk paint. I also got this on Amazon, and I've used this a couple times. I really like this paint. When I was home last, I built a buffet cabinet that I'll show it right here. I really liked how it turned out, and I used black milk paint on this, which I really liked that black milk paint. But the milk paint itself has really good coverage. I think a quart of it's like 20 bucks, so it's not exactly cheap. But I actually painted this dresser as well as I did some wainscoting in the back of my camper in the toy hauler area where this dresser is now. And I painted the whole back of the wainscoting with it too, so it goes a long way. And all I did was just brush it on. Now to add to the character of this and the farmhouse antique look, I do a few distressing techniques. As I've said in past videos, when I'm distressing stuff like this, there is no right or wrong way to do this. You do what works for you. I use a variety of tools, nuts and bolts, hammers, screwdrivers, basically anything to give it a distressed look. And you can't forget about the drawer fronts either. You got to distress them as well. Or another option is you don't have to do any of this. You can leave this wood as is and it'll be less work. Now basically what I'm going to do after dinging all this up is I'm going to come back where all those dings and defects are, and I'm going to lightly sand it with a high grit sandpaper. And as you can see here, I'm just taking my little mouse sander, and I really want to focus on the edges. This is where it's going to naturally be worn. And then, like I said, I want to run it over the defects. Now this gives it a really cool look, because where you put those dents and dings in, when you sand it, the sander can't reach those dents and dings. So it gives it a really cool antique look. And I also go around the feet, basically anywhere it would be worn. Now a lot of people aren't into this style, so like I said, don't do anything. You can make it a solid painted base. Another thing I like to emphasize is where that drawer hardware is going. I focus a little more attention on that too, because I'm mimicking distressed furniture here. Where those handles are is where it's going to be used the most, so that's where it will naturally wear. So on the drawer fronts, I definitely focus on that. Now, it doesn't look that great right now, but where those defects are and those sanding marks, I'm going to be using the same stain that I used on the top. And all I want to do is just run a little bit over these. This is going to darken the wood and make it match the top really nicely. And it'll kind of just all blend it together. With this milk paint, you can see where I sanded it. It kind of brightens that wood and almost scratches it. But once you put this on there, it blends it all together. It'll stain the raw wood, and then you can use a clean cloth and wipe off the rest of it on the painted area. This is the furniture polish I'm going to be using. This is the only thing I finished these drawer boxes with, and this is going to do two things. It's going to protect the wood in the drawer boxes a little bit. Another thing it's going to do is it's going to lubricate this. As I've said, there is no drawer slides on this. So these are your drawer slides, that raw plywood. So this will lubricate that to go in and out, and it works really well. Now another thing I do is I put this furniture polish on literally this whole piece of furniture. I put it over the paint, and that will protect the raw wood you exposed from the sanding as well. And it also gives the milk paint just a little bit of gloss. And another thing I do want to say is I did put that furniture polish on the top over the shellac as well. Here I'm just connecting the drawer fronts. I'm just using playing cards for even spacing, and then just screwing through the drawer box into the drawer front to get that mounted. Now one thing I didn't do here is put like a stopper. So with these drawer boxes, you can pull them all the way out. There's no way to stop them. So you just got to remember when using them, don't pull them all the way out, or come up with a creative way to get them to stop. Now another thing I did here to add to the distressed look, which looking back, I almost wish I didn't do this. I just used that same high grit sandpaper and went around the hardware to distress it. It just looks super artificial to me, and I definitely wouldn't do that again. In hindsight, I probably should have used a higher grit to make it look better, but you live and you learn. Now here, I'm going to briefly show you how to use those Z-clips. As you remember in the beginning of the video, we put those grooves in the side aprons as well as the front and the back on the top. And all these Z-clips do is you put one end without the hole into that groove, and then all you got to do is pre-drill a screw right into that. Now as you can see, I put it in at an angle. All I had was 1-inch screws, and this is only a 3/4 inch thick top, so I didn't have any 1/2 inch screws or 3/4 inch. If I did, I would have put them straight down. But you put a few of them Z-clips in, and that top is perfectly free to expand and contract. Now here's where I left that 1/4 inch gap for a plywood piece to cover that back up to give it a more professional look. By all means, go ahead and do that. I didn't. Let me know what you think about this build. Let me know if you try building it yourself. I'd love to hear how it goes. I try making it clear and accessible for everyone to try and build it, so I'd love to see pictures. Go ahead and email them to me if you build it. I'd love to see your paint variations and your own spin on things. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.